Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 8 of Cyberpunk Edgerunners. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So it seems like once again we're opening up on something seemingly unrelated. You know, in this case, it seems to be like a corporate office worker having, I guess, a slight disagreement with her boss. You know, like, hey, can I go home? It's late. And the answer, of course, is no, because in the dystopia of Night City, you have to work a lot. I mean, after all, you know, the corporation comes first. But interestingly, you know, this woman appears to be in a similar situation as Gloria, in that, you know, she's a working mom and her son has been accepted into Arasaka Academy. It does seem like her job is rather thankless, but that's definitely the norm, you know. In fact, I would be surprised if any job was not thankless. Although, unfortunately for this poor woman, she's just stumbled upon David having presumably just killed Director Evans, and now, you know, she's staring down the barrel of a gun, and it's certainly, you know, not going to work out for her. Now, the interesting thing is that this is definitely kind of out of character. You know, David's none too concerned about killing people, but neither of those two people necessarily were involved in the gig, so, you know, I'm sure it'll get explained later. So it seems like Arasaka is starting to understand that something's going on, you know. It's very clear that their high priority is catching the Netrunner, but at the same time, you know, they're aware that somebody killed Director Evans, and whoever it was somebody else, so, you know, that's important, but it's not the highest priority. I guess the unfortunate thing is that Arasaka is all kind of cognizant of all of this, and that they're working on trying to figure things out. Unfortunately, it seems like they're sort of putting two and two together here. You know, they understand that a fixer might be feeding some information to sort of further Militech's goals, But these guys here, they make it clear that they know the game, you know. If they can offer Faraday something bigger and better than he's currently getting, then, you know, surely he would have no problem selling David and Lucy up the river. And it certainly seems like Arasaka has sent some goons to send Faraday a message. You know, they don't necessarily know that he's the one behind all this, and I think it's safe to assume that he is, but, you know, those Arasaka goons themselves said, you know, it could be any one of these people, might as well hit them all just to be safe. And I guess in Night City, where collateral damage doesn't really matter, then yeah, you can kind of get away with something like that. So Faraday, he already kind of knows what's going on here. And it seems like this is in fact some corporate stuff going on here. You know, his Militech higher-ups, they're not really too sympathetic to his cause, you know. We're not going to give you hazard pay, we're not going to really help you unless you start producing results. So Militech is making it pretty clear to Faraday that he's skating on thin ice here. So if anything, it seems like it would only be sensible for Faraday to switch sides if Arasaka is going to treat him at least marginally better than Militech is currently. You know, if nothing else, Faraday certainly does seem fed up with Militech. And I guess in his position, I can't really blame him, being caught between a rock and a hard place. So this is something we haven't really seen from David too much, you know. He definitely doesn't really seem like himself, and he's making it kind of clear here, you know. I would imagine that little bit he said earlier about, you know, he kind of spaced out for a second when he killed those people. I feel like that's definitely weighing on his mind, because, you know, you don't just sort of get distracted over nothing, you know. There's got to be something deeper going on here. And you know what? That little tremble in his hand, you know, we've seen that before, and it wasn't good. So now we're getting something interesting. It seems as though between Tanaka and Arasaka and Militech, the whole, I guess, midpoint of everything is the cyber skeleton project that this guy has alluded to. Now, naturally, that seems like, you know, a weapon, and I'd wager a pretty potent one, too. So it only makes sense that if Militech is developing it, Arasaka would be interested, or vice versa. And given that this guy's condition is eliminating anybody who knows about the project, I feel like, you know, if David knows anything about it, and we don't have any indication that he does, that would paint a pretty big target on his back. So it seems like this Arasaka guy is pretty convinced that this is an outside job here, with people prying into the Cyber Skeleton project. Of course, we know that this guy is, in all likelihood, alluding to Lucy, but I don't think Faraday necessarily knows that. So this is kind of interesting, it's a bit of a call between Lucy and Kiwi, and Lucy seems to be inquiring about how the group's doing. Kiwi's expressing surprise that David managed to do as well as he did and that they're back with Faraday. But, it's interesting because I feel like Lucy could just sort of ask David herself. But, there's something going on. Everybody's being kind of mopey and evasive in a weird way when being direct would really just solve the problem. So there we have it, Kiwi's repeating the mantra that you should not trust a single soul in Night City, and how Kiwi was the one who taught Lucy that. Given that Faraday has now shown up, I think it's safe to say that sometimes foreshadowing is kind of subtle, and sometimes it's rather on the nose. So it seems that David's little issue with those people at Arasaka, that's still sort of affecting him, to the point where, he couldn't even shoot like an ordinary punk in the head. And normally that might not be an issue for him, but I guess he sort of might be cognizant of the fact that he killed an innocent person. And not just any innocent person, but an innocent person who was rather similar to his mom. And that's gotta be a rather unfortunate revelation that he is becoming very similar to, those guys who were just having a shootout that winded up getting his mom killed. Now I do have to feel kinda sorry for Rebecca here. She's very clearly barking up the wrong tree. She's interested in David, but, nothing's going to come of it. And I guess she does sort of have an interest in being a good friend. She notices the performance issues he's having. It's almost interesting in a way that David and Rebecca are more like brother and sister than anything else. And it's especially interesting considering that Rebecca wasn't especially close with her actual brother. So here we have it. Rebecca's saying, maybe cut back on the chrome for a bit, because she can pick up the slack, and, that's a fair point. She makes a good point, and it's reasonable, and she's not being invasive about it. But, David doesn't seem like he's gonna go for it, which surely will not have negative consequences. So now I have another little interesting net running sequence, and I do think that stylistically it's kind of interesting. I think I would have liked something more, I don't know, like retro in its aesthetic, something kind of more like Tron, or like, the generic vaporwave stuff you kind of see, but this is pretty cool too, and like the sort of sketchiness of it, I guess, indicates the ramshackle nature of the net, because as I understand it, it's not particularly stable or secure. Alright, so it seems like David is remembering what had happened. You know, he killed this guy and had no issue about it. At least not initially, but now he's sort of, I guess, hallucinating in a similar way to when he was forced to watch that BD. I mean, I guess it only makes sense in a situation like this when he's hallucinating so heavily that he would just kind of shoot somebody without thinking too much. After all, if you saw like this sort of merger of flesh and metal like that, you know, I'd imagine it'd be very hard to be level-headed. You know, not that it necessarily gives David an out, considering that these hallucinations are probably the product of just having too much chrome and metal. Yep, and there we have it, you know. He's aware of what he did. The picture of that woman is very similar to a picture of him. So it seems like, I mean, obviously based on the familiarity, this isn't the first time he's seeing the doctor here. But it does seem like, you know, the Ripper Doc here is gonna kind of gloat about the cyberpsychosis and all that, catching up to David. I mean, by his estimation, it would have happened a lot earlier, but David is apparently special. So, even though David's been given a pretty severe warning, you know, he's not reversing course at all. He just wants stronger immunosuppressants, which, you know, that's definitely not a good thing to do. Like, you know, you can put a band-aid over a stab wound, but it's not gonna help you. So there we have it. You know, the Ripper Doc informs him that you have basically 9 days of meds and, you know, in all likelihood, you'll be out of your mind or dead by then. And I guess the Ripper Doc is cognizant that, you know, the path David's taking will end up making him a legend if he does sort of burn out in the way it seems like he will. So it is unfortunate that David's sort of going down the same path Maine did, you know. Lucy knows about what's going on now, at least a little bit, and, you know, David wants to keep things all hush-hush. You know, it is really kind of tragic that despite being given some clear, sound advice, David's not taking it, and it's basically because he's trying to live out everybody else's dreams. He's trying to live out dreams for his mom and Maine. And I mean, to a degree, like, they're both dead, you know, they're not going to care all that much if you don't fulfill their dreams for them. But I guess, you know, it's part of David's character. He doesn't really have a dream of his own, so he feels he has to elevate other people. Yeah, so there we have it. You know, by his own admission, he doesn't really care about killing hired goons and thugs, but having killed that innocent bystander, like, that's like a little part of your humanity that's gone forever, you know? There's no coming back from something like that. So I guess I can understand, in a way, why David would be unwilling to prolong his life, considering what he's done. You know, that's a hard pill to swallow, but maybe like, suicide by Megacorp isn't necessarily the right approach. So, if David was being invasive about the cyberpsychosis stuff, Lucy's being invasive about her clandestine net running. And unfortunately, she's not willing to tell David. You know, he couches it as an issue of trust here, like, you don't trust me enough to tell me. You know, it seems like there's a fundamental lack of trust on both sides. You know, in a way, this is sort of like an inflection point. If they could both just sort of swallow their pride a little bit, you know, maybe they could fix things in a reasonable way. But, you know, they're not necessarily reasonable people. And Night City isn't a reasonable place. So, you know, they both just kind of do what they feel they have to. David continuing on, and Lucy taking care of this other net runner. So, while Lucy might have managed to kill this guy if he was a normal net runner, it seems it was actually a trap, and, you know, I'll give you 3 guesses as to who was likely behind it. Turns out Faraday's going to be getting that bonus from Arasaka after all. And, you know, if Faraday capturing Lucy weren't bad enough, it was largely due to Kiwi and her betrayal. It is, as she said, you know, you can't trust a single soul in Night City. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.